All right, let's go ahead and begin. At this point in the, I don't know, we're about a month into our conference symposium. It is pretty hard to get me excited about a new talk, but I am so excited here today to hear from Kelly. So let me introduce you quickly to Kelly Steckel before she begins her talk, Make Every Communication Count in the New Normal. So Kelly is always eager to discover something different, looking in the opposite direction to see if she's missed something, and then questioning what she has found. Kelly's driven by curiosity and putting her skills to work building and executing global sales enablement programs that help her clients align their marketing and sales strategies and efforts with the motivations, feelings, and expectations of clients to deliver experiences that connect, inspire, and motivate people to act. Her ability to see challenges through multiple lenses is fueled by her experience living across the globe, from the US to Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Australia, working in global B2B marketing and sales and business development roles for AEC firms and design suppliers and manufacturers. She also teaches English and cross-cultural communications, and she's currently a volunteer language instructor for the Center for Victims of Torture. She may actually be the most interesting person in the world, but I'll let you judge that for yourself. And with that, I will turn it over to Kelly. We are so glad that you're here.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah. And really, thank you to Zweig Group for inviting me to present with you here today and to have this chat. I've been listening over the past 6 or so weeks, and really have had some phenomenal speakers with some amazing insights and information that's really helped to not only put this presentation together in part, but I think helped us all to figure out how to navigate that new normal. So before I get started into actually what that new normal is and what it actually could mean to you, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, but I think that pretty much covered it, what Jamie Claire mentioned. So I have lived across the globe. I started out, I grew up in Chicago, and at the age of about 21, 22, I packed 2 bags, sold everything I had, and moved to Hamburg, Germany. And from there, life just took over. I've lived then in Switzerland, Singapore, New York, Singapore, Sydney, Melbourne, and now I'm back in New York at one of the most crazy and wild times that I'm sure we all are well versed in. It's an interesting week coming up, I guess. But with that, you know, in most of the roles that I held over the past years, they were largely in BD sales roles. There were some in director of marketing roles, and mainly for architectural and architectural build firms, as well as the supplier side. So Hayworth, USM, things like that. And really within that, I found my sweet spot in an area called sales enablement. So I'm not going to get too much into that right now, because I think you'll understand what that means as we go forward. But for the sake of this presentation, I think we start with, what it really is, that new normal. So with COVID, I think we've all experienced a wild time. I mean, really just an incredibly wild time. And it's been a huge challenge for all of us. As I said, I'm back in New York. This is me. I think at the beginning, we all embraced COVID. We embraced being locked down, and we got on Zoom calls with our friends and family and did networking events. Me, I enjoyed my own company and my reflection in the mirror. But I do have to say, after some time, I did get quite depressed. It was not an easy time. It still isn't an easy time. And in order to make myself feel better, kind of took to the streets, which I have to say were very empty, which was quite eerie. And really what I was in search of is a connection, some human interaction and engagement. And so, I would go out and I would stare people dead in the eyes, hoping that, I'd get a smile in return, I'd get something in return. And largely their heads were down, eyes were down, and I'd come home and I'd feel sadder and more depressive than when than not leaving the house at all. And, I kept doing this and I kept feeling bad. And then one day I thought, maybe they're feeling down. Maybe they're looking down because they're feeling down. Maybe they're feeling the same way as I do. They're experiencing it slightly differently, and they need something else to cope than what I need. But we're in the same boat. We're wearing the same shoes. And that is what empathy is all about. Empathy is truly the ability to think and feel like somebody else in order to understand and guide your actions with that person. So I'm sure you've heard empathy being spoken about from a lot of people these days. It has been labeled one of the top, or cited as one of the top qualities in leadership, and it has always been within the client engagement and business sector. But it's being talked about more and more today, obviously because of COVID. And it's really the tool that is helping business leaders to be able to help their team and their people through this crisis, as well as help their business through some recovery. So as a result of the pandemic, empathy, awareness, vulnerability, and compassion, again, have been cited as the key components. I think when you are empathetic, I think that awareness, that vulnerability, and that compassion just kind of naturally come through, which is a great thing to see. But now the question is, how do we all become more empathetic? And what does it mean actually within client engagement? During this presentation, I'm not going to talk about what it means in working with your teams or your teams abroad, because I think that's a whole different discussion. So I'm strictly going to stick to client engagement. And I'm also going to preface this talk by saying sometimes you might hear the word sales or seller. I know that within this industry, it's almost like a 4-letter word or a dirty word, but it is actually what you're doing. So I do apologize if sometimes you're going to hear this. And I do understand that it is slightly different in different companies or different firms, that it is client engagement, it is business development, it is sales. So with that, when it comes to client engagement, empathy really plays a unique role in that it's actually what allows you to dig deeper, to build deeper relationships with clients, so that you understand their motivations, their challenges, their needs. And we always talk about that, but it's somehow, we don't really know. So often when I would talk to salespeople, because I used to work on a local level in Asia, training local sales teams, as well as working with the global account managers. And oftentimes people just didn't know. And I think empathy, and especially right now with all that we're going through, empathy is what makes us able to dig deeper. Knowing what's happening with your clients, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, how things are affecting them. It can move relationships, it can build brand evangelists, it can build loyalty. And all of these are essential when doing business at any time, let alone during COVID. So I don't know if you participated in some of the other talks about marketing and around what Zweig Group had found in their research. But one of the most cited business development or marketing strategies, I think they labeled it a marketing strategy, was building relationships. So we all know within this industry, relationships are the key thing. But now we have to do it from behind a screen, and it's a challenge. So what happens when we have to move from the golf course or getting drinks at the bar versus now getting drinks in the bathroom, which I don't normally do. Let me just preface that. And I think it was a joke that I saw, so I thought I'd play it with you. But, a lot of us are having to adapt, not only to what is currently happening, but will continue to happen. And, within all of the training and meetings and discussions that are had between BD, marketing, and even sales, empathy is the one thing that's quite often very much overlooked and can make the most profound difference. And during COVID, again, it's that much more important. It's part of the marketing process. And, granted, everything has changed. We now sit behind screens. Some of us not wearing pants, though I'm wearing pants, don't worry. But, we don't go to work. We work from home. A lot has changed. And being able to navigate those changes and understand your client needs, what your client needs are, and how they're thinking and feeling will actually help you navigate the next normal or the new normal. So what is the new normal? Well, God, I wish I had a real true answer to that. I think for a lot of us, it's getting comfortable with living in a virtual world, which, by the way, does bring a lot of opportunity. But it can also mean especially for people who are now converting to that seller-doer model, it means acquiring a new set of skills, technical and communication, as well as getting comfortable with selling. Sorry, again, that's that dirty word. So, training could be something that would help, and I could help you do that. Vu could help you do that. But for most making that transition, we have to move to getting to a more productive and fulfilling client engagements in a different way. And empathy truly is at the heart of that. So, like I said, a little bit of empathy can go a long way. We're going to examine empathy during this talk and how it applies to BD and sales. I'll provide you with some tips and tools and some strategies along the way. And I think I've missed a slide here. Sorry about that. But it helps you to build let me start from this slide. A little empathy goes a long way. It helps you truly to build a strong relationship. And as I talked about before, that relationship is so key within this industry. It helps you to understand your clients better, which helps you to deepen that relationship, which ultimately helps you to win more projects, even from behind a screen. So what you come away with today is how empathy can help with your client engagements to build those business development and business and trusting relationships. It'll help you to enhance client engagements by building deeper relationships in virtual experiences as well as digital exchanges. And at the end, halfway through, we'll discuss with a global panel that I've invited to discuss how empathy actually applies to better communication when you're working across the globe or even in your own backyard. Because as we know, in the United States and around the world, we are full of people from all different places in the world. If you've ever been on a New York subway, that's exactly how it is. So with that, here's the plan for today. We've got 30 minutes of me talking. Sorry for that. The second part will be when I ask the global panel to come in. So we've got 3 people who will be dialing in from all across the globe. We've got Morten from Denmark. We've got Miriam from Tunisia, and Victor Menengo, who's calling in from the Philippines. So if he's still awake by the time that we get to him, I will be eternally grateful. So after that, we'll go into, a quick Q&A, and then we'll do a 2-minute recap at the end to close out the session. So with that, let's get started. So what is empathy? As I said before, empathy is truly being able to recognize and understand and feel another person's emotions so that you can guide your actions. It's putting yourself in their shoes. What it is not is sympathy, and often these get confused. Sympathy, think of it as if somebody is at a funeral or they're sick, You can feel sorry for them. You can take pity on them, but you're not in the same situation they are. And sympathy is a tricky one when it comes to client engagements because it can actually be counterproductive. If the client starts to feel that you are taking pity on them, that you're looking down at them, it can be counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve. Whereas the opposite is true for empathy. Empathy is actually what helps to build trust. And that is our first point of discussion. So empathy builds trust. And trust, as you know, is hugely important to client engagements. Trust is the foundation of feeling heard and feeling seen by the people you're encountering. It helps you to feel that sensation of well-being, of being taken care of. And you might not fully know it, that you're feeling that at the time, but that's exactly what's happening. So empathy builds trust. Not only that, having troubles clicking. Empathy improves questioning. And I think questioning for me is honestly the most important point through this whole presentation. It's something that I've seen throughout my career and working with others, and really a skill that I've had to develop along the way. Questioning is what makes people feel that you're actually interested in what they're talking about. I think we can all remember a networking event that we were at when we were introduced to somebody and they spent the next 20 minutes talking about them, not asking a single question. And you were left feeling somewhat empty, but also, I don't know if you really liked them anymore after that, or you had any inclination to get together with them. So empathy in itself helps you ask questions, but it also helps you to ask the right questions because you're really in tune with who that person is and what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. So when it comes to questioning number one, it helps you to build rapport. And rapport is such an important quality. Rapport actually signals that you are listening, that you're interested. And it helps in that questioning it helps you to probe. So probing questions, I think we all know kind of what they are, but probing questions are those that kind of push something further. It's well, can you tell me more about that? Or why did that matter to you so much? Or what would you have done differently and why? So some of you may know of I think it's a practice called the 5 whys, that after you ask why 5 times, and you finally get down to what the real root or the core of the situation or the problem is. You can apply that, but the point is really to remember that asking questions and just pushing a little bit further will help you to get more information. And with that information, it helps you to build credibility. Go back. It helps you to build credibility. So credibility, for me, I think about this time when I was, I don't know if any of you know who Seth Godin is. He's one of my favorite marketers, mainly because he's just no nonsense. So I attended this workshop with him probably about 10 years ago in New York. And, it was an hour. I think he spent, the first 30, 40 minutes like me talking to you, at you. And then he opened it up for questions. And, largely the people within the room were entrepreneurs. And, so they stood up and they gave their story and they said, I've been doing this, I've been doing that. And, that doesn't seem to be working. So I tried this and that doesn't seem to be working. And then, they keep going. And all of a sudden he would stop them and say, then why do you keep doing that? And they would kind of, sigh and look around and think, really trying to locate some logic within the situation. And eventually they say, well, I don't know. And this happened one after another. And why I bring up this story is because when he was asking them questions, obviously he had told them a lot of stuff before, but he didn't have to tell them anything more. He asked them a poignant question that led them to be a bit perplexed and to, have this little bit of pain in their belly. And I can bet you that when they went home, they sat there, they couldn't sleep, or they sat there and, tummy rumbling and all this kind of stuff. And eventually they probably bought one of his books or one of his courses, and they took that next step. So my point in credibility is that by asking questions, you actually build more credibility than when you're just telling people what to do. And that in itself leads to the last point, which is self-discovery. So this is an important one. Clients don't buy from you because you've convinced them of a solution. They buy from you because they've convinced themselves of the need. And I think that's pretty powerful. And if you think about it, what it imparts or implies on your business development, your client engagement, your marketing, it has a huge effect. They don't buy because you told them to or you asked them to. They buy because they convinced themselves of the need for it. The third one, which now seems like the seventh because of all that questioning talk, empathy helps define the problem. It helps you to understand how your client is feeling, and therefore you're able to actually craft the problem so that eventually, in the next step, you can define the solution. You know what they need. You know how they need it. They've told you. And so you can define the proper solution for them. Story here, and he might be on, so apologies for using this story without asking you, but I won't say who you are. He had once gotten a couple months ago, and he had gotten a brief from a new client. And this brief was a 57-page PowerPoint. And it was a shock because that's not something normally that a client gives you up front. Number one, a brief. Number two, that type of information. And within it, though, what I found particularly interesting is it started kind of, they had put their personas together. So, the husband, how he saw himself, the wife, how she saw herself. And then it went on to things that inspire them, things that they like, things that they enjoy doing. And I thought to myself, this is bloody brilliant. I mean, how often do you have to go through all of this that I'm talking about to try to get to the heart of that? And they handed it over in a 57-page document. Brilliant. I know he later really appreciated it. And I wish every client would do that. But that empathy, that understanding who the client was, how they saw themselves, how they perceive the world, that gives you the ability to craft a very poignant and defined solution that actually resonates with them. Which brings me to my fifth point, which is empathy creates a bond. And we all know that, relationships with clients, relationships with anybody change, they erode over time. But when you're empathetic, you can feel that change taking place and you can adjust it. You can get in contact, and then you can likely create even a deeper bond. And we know bonds are important to that relationship building. And number 6, obviously, it will help you win the project. You've done all the things right. You've defined the problem in the correct way so that you've provided the right solution. And therefore, you're much more apt to win the project. Before I get into what this slide contains, I want you to think about how all of that I just discussed. Now, if your sellers are doing that, and if you had your marketing doing that in tandem, how powerful could you be? You've got sales engaging with clients in an empathetic manner, bringing back real life, true insights. And you've got marketing creating content and tools reflective of those needs. and feeding them back to sales to then feed them back to the client. That's what this looks like here. This is called a client or a buyer engagement plan. So you see that at the top, you've got the virtual interactions. This is more of your client engagements. And then you've got your digital information exchanges. This is, or in this example, if you can see, social media. Marketing has created a white paper that they're now putting out into the world via social media. Then the seller or your client engagement or BD person is using that white paper, sending it to a client and calling them up and saying, what did you think? And they already kind of know what they think because they've talked to that client and others like them in the past to know what's happening in their world. Then they talk to marketing. Marketing created something reflective of that information and then fed it back out. I hope that's making sense to you. It's called alignment. When sales and marketing or BD and marketing are aligned, this works really well. When they're not aligned, I think you can see where it can all break apart. B2B buyers require a minimum of 4 and as many as 20 interactions evenly distributed across human and non-human touchpoints throughout the buyer's journey to complete the purchase. Wow. Okay. And that's according to Serious Decisions, which this I think was put out in 2019. So you can just imagine what it is now. And in our industry, because of the sales or the buyer cycle is so long, you can imagine that could be even 10 times more. And with that, then I'm just thinking about that funnel. If you've got such a long buyer cycle, who's creating that content for you? If I think about how a lot of marketing and business development teams are organized, they vary. I would wager to say, or not wager to guess, but in my opinion, I think that it could be quite beneficial to firms to maybe think about restructuring that or what that means to them. I think what I've seen a lot, having worked within firms and having spoken and done a lot of research within this area, because when I did my MBA, I did my thesis on how architectural firms utilize social media in their marketing strategies. So I talked to small, medium, and large size firms. And what I saw was largely, well, at that time, social media wasn't used very much. But what marketing meant to them was an RFP or a proposal. It was a presentation that needed to be created. It was their brochure, a little bit their website. But it wasn't content that we call inbound content or inbound marketing. It was outbound. It was pushing their message out into the world about who they were. It wasn't reflective necessarily of the conversations that they'd had with clients and the needs that they had with clients, which is creating a case study, a white paper, insights and assets that, that clients really adhere to. So that might be one thing. So when you look at, this is actually a typical selling cadence that combines both the virtual interactions and the digital information exchanges between both departments. So the slide that you had just seen, this is kind of looking at all of the assets around the client journey. And I remember in the first session when Chad said, marketing fuels growth, it does. It absolutely does. And it's the strangest thing at this point in time. And I've really never understood it. I mean, I do from a financial perspective, but in a downturn, why marketing is the first thing that goes. I understand that it's a cost center, but it doesn't have to be if it's tied to KPIs and linked to revenue. And it's absolutely what you need to be doing when you don't have projects coming in. And I know, again, that sales cycle is long, the buyer cycle is long, projects take a long time to acquire. But when you're feeding them information, valuable information, from ebooks to infographics that have insights and knowledge that they can use and take back to their organizations to make a case for why they need you, over time, they remember you. And when they're ready to then make that purchase, they will come back to you. They'll remember how you made them feel. They'll remember the things that you did for them along the way. And that will have a result, a meaningful result. So again, it's questionable why it goes. I understand why marketing gets the boot, so to speak. But again, it's the wrong time to do that. I think now, especially because of the transformation that we're making to a more digital or online versus offline, it's even that more critical. So it could be that you need to re-examine, who you have in your marketing department and the skills that they have, and get the help that you need. And this can be outsourced, or this can be learned through courses. VU offers courses as well. But I think it's just something that I would suggest you think about anyway. That and a few other tips. So business leaders, whether BD or sales, however it is that you describe this within your organization, they need to ensure that appropriate content is created and available to the BD team to share. So again, going back to kind of the next point, is that marketing will create the assets and the information and the tools that are needed by the sales team. If the sales team or the BD team shares with them their insights, they're the ones who are going out and talking to clients for the most part. They're coming back with a lot of insight and information as to who those clients are, what their challenges are, what their motivations are. Marketing needs to be able to get that information and use it to create assets that are relevant for them. And when they do that, the whole cycle will be much more successful. Not only using empathy, but creating target personas and a new client journey. I think I say this all the time, but in large part, I think that not only are clients' needs changing, but what that means is that the whole business is changing. So unless we ask the questions to really understand what's happening in the client's business and in their world in particular, we're not going to be able to craft a solution that's necessarily on target. So I think it's a good idea to go back and to redesign those personas, those client personas, and to remap the buyer journey, and then fill it with content and useful information. I also think it's a good idea for business development teams to join and follow as many online groups and channels as they can. Obviously, they have to be relevant, and you have to think about how much time you have throughout the day to be able to participate, because if you don't participate will help you with the networking. The other side of it is information gathering, and that's also useful. So think about why you're doing what you're doing and choose wisely. I think it's also worthwhile to consider joining other groups that maybe you hadn't thought about. Meaning, where are your clients at? What groups are your clients a part of? So for example, when I was working in Australia, I was working largely in the hospitality sector for this design firm. And instead of attending the Cornet or the CBRE and the different real estate groups, I decided I was going to attend some hospitality hotel events. So one that I went to in Brisbane was about a technology they use for booking rates. Booking rates don't really apply to me. They don't really necessarily change the design, even though I might argue that as well. But the point is that I was learning I was learning about what was happening in those hotels, so that when I sat down with them, I could have an intelligent conversation. I could ask them questions. Tell me more. I was probing them. Tell me more about what this means to you. How would design influence this? Would it? I think you get my point. So just think a little bit outside of the box as to what you join and what you want to spend your time in, because networking is possible, but it might not look the same way that it looked before. It definitely is not going to be at a pub anytime soon, or at a retreat, as we know, because obviously this has been a different experience for us, even this virtual conference. And fine tune your online profiles. If you were part of Charles Pulley, who is the CEO of Workfolio, he did a talk last week, and he mentioned this. And Workfolio helps to design a more audience-centric profile. So I think it'd be definitely worth looking into that. I would use metrics and analytics to guide you. There's so many different platforms available. It doesn't have to be a guessing game, what's working for you and what's not. And I'd make a plan, make an engagement plan, and get the help you need. If you don't have it in-house, ask a consultant. And lastly, be patient, but don't be complacent. Things have changed. And I think the sooner we can accept that and change with them, the more successful we'll be in the future. So one last time, empathy is essential to ensuring buyer interactions. Sorry. Let me start over. Empathy is essential to ensure effective buyer interactions in the virtual selling environment. What's more, and to add a whole nother layer of complexity, it is within culture as well. Engaging with clients and communicating effectively to win work when abroad is one of the hardest things any of us can and will do. So with that, I'm going to talk about cultural empathy and what that means. So culture, by definition, is a way of life of a group of people. It's the behaviors, the beliefs, the values, the symbols that they accept, and generally without even knowing it, but they're passed along from generation to generation, and largely unknowingly. Think about all the things that you do or don't do, and that you see people in other cultures doing, and you look at them and you question, why are they doing things that way? I have to say for myself, having lived abroad for so many years, it's taught me a lot. Yes, I'm a curious person by nature. I love to ask the word why, or the question why. But living abroad has taught me patience and humility. It's taught me to accept things that I can't understand, maybe that I don't even agree with. But having that cultural understanding, or that awareness that things are going to be different, and that's okay. Different is okay. It changes the way that you interact and you behave with everybody. So what it means for cultural empathy, or what cultural empathy means, it's really the same thing as we've discussed. Within culture, in various cultures, a lot of things are different. As we talked about earlier, culture breeds trust, it builds trust. But so building trust in different cultures looks differently, feels differently. Making decisions in different cultures looks differently and feels differently. There's a lot of things that are different. And in order to persuade effectively and ultimately win more projects, win more work, you have to understand the ins and outs, those cultural nuances that affect that communication so deeply. Because without it, there's a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication, and ultimately failure. So instead of me telling you all about how culture plays a part, or how culture plays a part in communication, and how empathy plays a part in that communication, I thought I would invite some people from around the world who I've worked with, I've lived with in Singapore, not in the same house, but who have all really impressed me along the way, and have taught me so many different things, as well as as learning from them, I've learned with them. So we've got Morten. Hold on, I have to bring up their bios because they're quite long. So we've got Morten here, Morten Jorgensen, who is Danish. So I'm going to have to read this because they are long bios, not long, but intricate. So Morten was born in Denmark. He's lived in China, Singapore, Switzerland, and has worked in 37 countries. He has worked on the supplier side largely for companies like Hayworth and Vitra. So Hayworth was where we met. It's actually where I met Victor Menengo as well. Victor, if you want to chime in, as well as Miriam, it's fine for you to all be here now. And now Morten is back in Denmark with his family, and he's now kind of working as a consultant where he's supporting mid-sized Danish clients with topics of market development strategies, client development strategies, and lastly, team development plans and tools. Then we have Miriam Hall. So Miriam was born in, Miriam, you there? Okay, yes. There she goes. It's, I think. Miriam, we can't see you. There we go. All right, so Miriam is from Tunisia, and she's calling in from Tunisia. She has lived and worked Tunisia, Cameroon, the Congo, Italy, Senegal, France, the US, Indonesia, Singapore, and is now back in Tunisia. One thing about, so all of us can speak a couple of different languages. Miriam is quite impressive in that she, God, I don't even know the number, it's probably about 9 or 10. She would say fluently, it's probably like 5, but once you know one, you can usually pick up another. Same with Morten, who, because he's Danish, can at least understand some other Scandinavian languages. And Victor, I'll let you tell them about the languages that you speak, yeah? So coming back to Miriam, she graduated in Paris with a master's in architecture. She's an interior architect, and she's worked designing mainly hotels and museums. And she's worked for mainly her own company she's had for, I think, the past 10 years or so, maybe less than that. She's worked for Woodhead and DWP as well. And I think I'm gonna have to end it there and let you fill in the rest. And then we have Victor Menengo, who's calling in from the Philippines. Thank you, Victor. I know it's late. Hopefully you haven't had too many cocktails before you came on. If not, have one when you get off, because I will for sure. So Victor is from Nigeria. He grew up there, like Miriam. They lived both in Tunisia and Victor in Nigeria until they were 2, and then moved around quite a bit with the family in different parts of Africa. So he was raised primarily in Liberia until he was about 14 years old, and then moved to LA. He's since lived in, obviously, California. He's lived in China, Australia, Singapore, and now back in the Philippines. He's in the Philippines. He's a trained architect as well, and has worked for FSY Architects, AECOM, and Hayworth, again, which is where we met. So what we all have in common is that, yes, we met in Singapore. We've all lived there. When you live in Singapore, it means that you don't really stay in Singapore. A lot of the business that you conduct is within the region, and that region is quite large. That region extends all the way from Singapore down to Sydney or down to Australia, all the way over to India and through to the Middle East in some instances. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of complexity there. And you know, communicating is a challenge. So why I've asked these 3 lovely people to talk about today is really because of time. It's not going to be too intricate. It's really just to discuss with you their experiences, living abroad, working abroad, how empathy played a part in communication, some mistakes that they had made, and what they've learned, and provide some advice to you. So with that, I'll stop talking and I'll go to Morten and ask him to, Morten, if you can kind of share with us maybe an experience that you have where culture, and where cultural empathy played a part.
Yeah, thanks. I think we have, being Danish and being in Denmark, we have a bit of an advantage because we're only 5.8 million people in this wonderful country. So we have to look out. We have to be quite open. We have to be quite understanding to the rest of the world. I think for all the travel that I have done and in the countries that I have been in, doing business on ground, we can always talk about all the mistakes. I think a lot of them have been trying to apply what we would think is a normal business conduct. So we would normally go for a client, we would see who are the decision makers, we'll map them out, we'll think we now got this client, we understand how they make decisions, we have all the titles lined up. Then you go to the Middle East, you apply the same strategy, and then after 2-3 months of pre-sales, you figure out, oh, it was the guy in the background with no title that actually makes the decision. So I think when we talk about these topics, and you and I, Kelly, we've talked about it before, I think there's two main learning points for me traveling around the world doing business. I think number one is make sure you have the right driver's license. And I don't mean for your car, I mean for the culture that you're going into. I think we often just fly in and think that we are going to apply our own business culture. So make sure you're well educated before you actually go on ground. I think the other thing is just having a bit of human insight. Most of us just wants to feel safe and significant. And it applies for business as well, whoever you're talking to. So what does that mean in that culture you're in? What does it mean to be safe and significant in the business relations when you're in Middle East or in Indonesia or in China or in Japan, in the US or in Denmark for that matter? That's different. And then I think the last piece is we forget to apply simple strategies that we normally would use. If we did a business strategy, we would define the end game. So how about defining the end game for a relationship? That will make you think about how is that culture actually working? How does it look like when we have that perfect relationship? And as you talked about before, when we've had these 4 to 20 engagements, and the client actually trusts us to make that engagement. I think it's the driver's license, it's the safe and significance for me, and I think it's defining that social relationship endgame.
Great. Miriam, what would you say?
I would say pretty much the same. Yes, you need that driving license. I think it's very important to the due diligence, to do your background check, to really try to get the most information you can in order to know who you're going to talk to. And it's and I think it's interesting because the three of us, when I look at the bios, we all have lived in many countries. And I think it's an exercise. You get used to adapting, and you get used to meet new type of people. And it's important, I think, really, besides the background check, is to be in tune with your emotions and in tune with your intuition in order to get into to have a real empathy. And also, I mean, to make sure you don't make mistakes. Like there are things you do in Saudi, for example, with the coffee. I mean, you can keep on, if you don't do the right movement with your cup, you can keep on drinking coffee all day long, because if you put back your cup on the table, they will fill it in again. So there are a few things like that that are very important. But also, I mean, in terms of design and project content, for example, some cultures like Indian cultures are very much open to storytelling. I mean, we're designers, we're architects, storytelling, concepts, they understand the progression of a project. Well, in China, and I made the experience because I went to work in China after I worked in India, and I I thought I could do the same. And no, the story was not that important. What was important is the price and in how fast you can work. So, if you don't know that before, you can make a huge mistake and then lose your project. So yeah, it's all about training and really authentically um, being in tune with people to understand them before even you propose anything.
Right. And Victor, do you have any experiences where you made some mistakes and you learned from them? So I just have to say that Victor is one who taught me something that I think I repeat to myself every day. The world is not black and white; it's full of gray, and the gray is uncomfortable, and the gray is scary, and the gray, but and because it's unknown, but it's the world is gray.
Well, I can't believe I actually taught you something, because evidently with the mistakes I've made across the globe, there's been quite a few of them. I agree with Miriam and Morten wholeheartedly. I think we've all kind of gone through the same situations. You definitely, have to have that significance and that empathy that you talked about. But I also think you have to have humility. Unlike Morten, I was coming from the US, I was coming from Los Angeles, the center of the world. In my eyes and in most American eyes. And I landed in Shanghai thinking I was going to go into some sort of backwaters, fishing village. And lo and behold, 20 million people in one little location. And I had this situation where I was coming in as the project lead for a project that we had won already. And it was a good thing that we had won it already. And I was introduced to the stakeholders to basically present to them. And coming in from the US, it's a very collaborative effort. And I walked in, and Miriam, you can relate to this. Wasn't quite storytelling, but I basically said, I don't have all the answers. It's going to be a collaborative effort. I'm going to be learning from you as much as you're going to be learning from me. And I could see the girl that was running our office on the side just doing this, stop doing this. And I was like, it's about the wisdoms of the crowds and all of this stuff. And I walked off the side, and she just looked at me and she goes, what the hell did you just do? And I go, I was just telling them this is going to be a collaborative effort. She goes, they literally think you're an idiot, that you're asking them to solve their problem when you're supposed to be the project lead. She goes, and she took me aside and she goes, this is how it works. She goes, China is a very structured, it's a very competitive, but also very collective society. They need to be told, they're paying you to give them an answer, and you're asking them to give you an answer. And so it was a big lesson I learned and carried on for the few years that I lived there. And
which is what I was going to mention when I talked about those probing questions. Really, everything that I talked about and why this culture session was brought into the end was because all of that means something else depending on the culture. You ask probing questions in certain cultures, they're not going to appreciate that, right? So it's doing that due diligence and really understanding what you're getting into before you get into it in particular. So just due to time, and unfortunately I apparently went over a bit, is there any questions from the audience to the panel that you'd like to ask? We can open that up now, so it's not just me asking questions. And until one appears, I'll just ask. Yeah.
I did see one earlier. It's gone now, but it basically said, can there be empathy fatigue? It's gone now, but was it answered?
Oh, that was.
Empathy burnout. Yeah. I'll take a stab at it. I don't think you can have. I don't think you can have empathy burnout. Empathy essentially is I think as humans, we're so egocentric that we always want someone else to connect to us. But I think where you can get the burnout is when empathy doesn't become authentic or it's not genuine, and it looks like you're trying too hard. That's how I would answer the question. But I don't think you can burn out by caring about.
Within a sales, sorry, Miriam, go ahead.
No, I think empathy burnout stands for healthcare workers, because doctors, nurses. It's very much a subject right now. I guess that's why we had this question It's because really, I mean, in order to understand what, I mean, the sufferance of people, and doing it every day, and mostly in a pandemic, you can get a burnout. I guess so. I mean, that's would be my.
Okay, good. Maybe from the perspective of client engagements, we've talked about. Now, what about with marketing and marketing assets that are created? To what level have you seen organizations really tailor those assets to different cultures or not? And what's been the impact? Morten?
I'll take a stab at that one. I've seen both sides of that actually. I've been a part of a company where we thought we had all the answers, and we did a I think, very classic corporate communication that we adapted into multiple markets outside outside Europe. And I've also been a part of course, where we're trying to communicate much more on a cultural level. I think it's really an important question actually you raise, because where it has worked, in my opinion, it's where you have brought in outsiders to help you fine tune the message that you're trying to get across locally, and also making sure that you don't fall into the traps. It's a little bit like the example of drinking coffee in Saudi Arabia. You can put so many things into your communication that will step on people's toes without even knowing it. It's a hugely important question, I think.
Yeah, and have you seen anyone do it well?
I think we did it very well at Hayworth.
Ah.
No, but I actually have to say that, even though we were on the team, but I think as a of course born and raised American organization as Hayworth, having been in Asia for 25 years, at the time we were working there, having a leadership that's been in Asia for quite some years, there was really an empathetic way of thinking when it came to marketing and how we put those messages together. I think that was actually quite well done. And I think it's a good example of how you bring in a full team, both of subject matter experts, but also local teams, to make sure that you're communicating in the right way.
Right. So I'll keep you all on for another minute or so, but I'll wrap this up so that people who need to leave can leave immediately. So I'll just go back to sharing my screen for 1 second. And let's see. So to close it out, I think this was a good quote by Harvard Business Review, which I'm always a fan of anything Forrester, Harvard Business Review, and so on and so weiter. Okay, I didn't do that. I think now it's got a mind of its own. But human interactions and connections are more important now in sales and marketing efforts than ever before. Demonstrating a genuine interest and concern for your clients. Look, honestly, that is the definition of empathy, but that's just good BD, sales, and marketing. I can't imagine it would ever be talked about any way differently. But in these challenging times, I think that there's a real opportunity to connect in a very unique and genuine way with clients that maybe you didn't before. One last story of mine, and this wasn't pandemic. This was a couple of years ago when I lived in Australia, and I was in an account management role, and there was a new account that was being handed over to me, and we were going to meet the client, and my colleague was running a few minutes late, and so I got there and I met with this lovely woman who, at the beginning, was demonstrating to me how very busy she is. She's a facilities manager. She didn't really have time. She was doing this, really didn't understand why. So I kind of felt that pressure. I felt that from her. And I thought, how do I reach this person? And how do I connect with them? And I noticed that obviously she wasn't Australian, given her accent. And I asked her where she was from. She's from Croatia. And I hadn't been there, unfortunately, so I didn't really have that in common or something to talk about there. So I took a chance, and I thought maybe this will be a way for us to connect. So I asked her, when you go home to visit your family every once, twice a year or twice every 3 years, does anybody ever ask you anything about yourself? What's happening in your world? What it's like living in Australia? And she kind of just, everything changed. She kind of slumped down, thought about it for a second, and then she looked back up and she was like, no. And I said, no, it doesn't happen with me either. And I'll admit it kind of hurts. And from that moment on, we were fast friends. We had built that connection. We built that bond on something that we could both relate to, but that was emotional, and it was a deep emotion, a deep connection. So I'm not suggesting that you all go out and talk about how your family makes you feel to your clients, yeah. But I took a chance in that moment to see if it might work, and it did. So with that, I love this quote by Maya Angelou, a very wise, very intelligent woman. I've learned that people will forget what you've said, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's what everything is about. That's what your business development should be about, what your marketing should be about. And what we should be doing out in the world today is making everyone feel a little bit better and demonstrating a little bit more empathy. So thank you very much. If the panelists want to stay on, appreciate Morten, Miriam, and Victor for chiming in. Sorry, that was a little bit shorter of a panel than I had planned. I tend to ramble on and tell too many stories, so apologies, but thank you very much.